Welcome to Artificially Intelligent Marketing, a weekly podcast where we stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, helping you get the best results from your marketing efforts. Now let's join our hosts, Paul Avery and Martin Broadhurst.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Artificially Intelligent Marketing, a podcast where we talk about all things AI and marketing for marketers across the world so that they can leverage AI tools to get the most out of their work. This is episode 8, and I'm back today with my very good friend Martin Broadhurst. Martin, I have missed your face.
Well, here it is. Take it in, admire it in all its glory. Yeah, it's been a long time. 2 whole weeks. That was quite the diary clash for both of us, wasn't it?
It was a bit, but we're back. So the inane banter that hopefully at least 5 to 10% of listeners enjoy is back today. But also, I've missed your AI insights, Martin, so I'm going to be glad to hear those
Before
too.
we get into any of that, I do want to hear about the Caribbean. How was it?
Beautiful. I don't know if you've ever been, but sitting on a beach, drinking a pina colada, reading the latest news on AI is the best way to read the latest news on AI. And I have to admit, I did listen to some Lex Friedman podcasts on the beach, so I was still nerding out on all this stuff, but I was doing it in the sun and I was doing it with a nice drink in my hand.
Well, that sounds lovely, because I was doing it in the British drizzle.
Bit of drizzle.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. And we won't even talk about Derby County this week.
We're outside the playoffs. It's an absolute travesty. We absolutely won't talk about it because it would just make me weep.
We can't have you weeping. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So this week's stories that we're going to cover, we are going to look at Stability AI launching their new open source large language model to rival the Chat GPTs and GPT-4s of the world. Google announces its Project Magi. Yeah. What does this mean? It means changes to Google search are coming, and we'll talk about that. Adobe has teased its AI-driven video editing tools powered by natural language instructions, which the demo video for that looks rather cool, so we can talk about that. There was an Economist article this week proposing an international agency to oversee AI, and we've previously talked on the podcast about the challenges of trying to slow AI development down when there's so many different competing issues around companies competing with each other, geographical, political issues there as well. So that's going to be an interesting one. Atlassian has infused AI into all of its products. So if you're a Jira user or a Confluence user, you can now tap into AI-powered tools, which we'll talk about. And then we'll also talk a little bit about Snapchat's AI chatbot, which has perhaps gone as viral, and if not more viral, than some of the other chatbot-style tools that have appeared since ChatGPT came out at the end of last year. We are also going to have a lovely tool of the week this week, where we're going to look at Anthropic's Claude model and go into a bit more detail on that. Right, let's get stuck in. Let's look first of all then at Stability AI launching its open source LLM model called StableLM to compete with the OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world. So this is seeing Stability AI get into the large language model game. If the name is familiar, it probably should be, because they've already released quite a few well-known models for different uses, perhaps the most famous of which is Stable Diffusion, which you can use for image generation. Martin and I were talking about this a little bit before we got on the recording here, in terms of what it means to have open source models versus more closed models like GPT-4. We'll dive into that in a bit more detail later, but with Stable Diffusion, you can access the underlying model, remove some of the guardrails from it, and do some cool stuff with it that you want to do. And so I guess the inference here is that that's going to be possible with StableLM. But as TechCrunch said this week, the number of open source text generating models grows practically by the day as companies large and small vie for visibility in the increasingly lucrative generative AI space. So why is this important? It's kind of like, oh, and another one. But I think some quotes in the blog post from Stability AI are a little bit telling, where they say, we open source our models to promote transparency and foster trust. Researchers can look under the hood to verify performance, work on interpretability techniques, identify potential risks, and help develop safeguards. They also say open fine-grained access to our models allows the broad research and academic community to develop these techniques beyond what is possible with closed models. So perhaps they're Martin, a little dig in the ribs to the OpenAI team, whose name is OpenAI, but have been criticized recently, especially with the release of GPT-4, for how little information they've shared about how the model was built and trained. I think they've given some very good reasons in terms of, I know there's commercial reasons for that, but I think there's also some potential safety reasons for that. But it does feel a little bit like Stability AI are saying, hey, this is what OpenAI actually looks like, OpenAI. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's their whole model, is that open source. There's a real commitment to it. You see actually a lot of engagement from the Stability AI research team and all the developers on Hugging Face, which is committed to open source AI ML projects. So yeah, it's nice to see that there is a company committing to it. I think the open source model for LLMs, that space is going to get quite interesting, because you've also got Bloom as a large language model kind of on the horizon. That's an open source model as well. So yeah, it's exciting to see what we can do with this. I think the ability for researchers to get under the hood, but also commercial operators to start shaping these models in the way that they want is also going to be quite interesting. That said, how many people are going to do that when you've got systems like GPT-4, which is so incredibly capable? It's a bigger, more capable model, and is likely to prove to be a bigger, more capable model than the top level Stability LLM when that comes out. I think it's 175, 180 billion parameter model that they're talking about releasing down the line. So we know that GPT-4 is bigger than that. When OpenAI is making customization of GPT-4, I was going to say so easy. That's definitely not the case. But, there is vector embeddings, there is fine tuning available with that through the API. How many organizations just need that capability rather than having a model that actually you can pull to pieces in a kind of open source way? I say pull to pieces, that's probably wildly exaggerating it, but you understand the point.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think that leads on to the question then, why is this important for marketers and what do they need to know? And fundamentally, open source LLM large language models are more customizable because they're open source, and so that for developers of products will give them the capacity to potentially build on top of this and customize the model in different ways. I guess for companies with the necessary resources, they may even consider that they want to create an LLM of their own off the back of something like this. And to be fair, some of the other open source models like Llama and Alpaca and GPT for all, and so Stability AI is maybe a little late to the game here, but all of those are options for people who want to train their own model on their own data. The other thing with these open source models is you can run them on your computer, albeit in most cases very slowly, which might make it easier for people to use these models securely by not, in effect, having to use cloud-based resources. And I think even for some organizations, they're prohibited from using cloud-based LLMs like ChatGPT because you have to give data over to another organization. Whereas if you can run an open-sourced LLM on your own computer and you're effectively running a local chatbot-style version, you can obviously be much more confident that the information is safely stored on your computer. But what about these models without guardrails as well? We were talking a bit about that, Martin, because obviously there has been some criticism of ChatGPT and GPT-4 in terms of when it will refuse to do things, or if it will say, oh, just before we get into this, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, and all these other caveats that it slips in, which I completely understand. But I do think there are people out there who have the feeling that as responsible adults, they want to be trusted to interact with the tool and use their own good judgment. Whether that is good or not, I'm not really in a position to say. But you were talking about some of these models have been used without guardrails, and how open sourcing allows you to explore the fringes.
Yeah, so you can see this with the other stable or stability AI model that many of us would be more familiar with, Stable Diffusion. Stable Diffusion, the text-to-image image generator, has been open sourced, and the open source community does like to hack things to pieces and create things and build upon existing models and what have you, and existing tools, and make them their own. Just need to look at the Linux community and all the different flavors of Linux that exist in the world. Stable Diffusion is a great example of this, where people have really fine-tuned the models to get some really impressive results. There's a website that I use, a service called Super Machine. You can go to supermachine.art, and they've taken a whole bunch of different use cases for Stable Diffusion and fine-tuned it. So I'm just looking at a list of the options here. You've got Super Machine Coloring Book, which will create coloring book pictures, line drawings that look like they're great for coloring books. You've got double exposure, low poly optimized versions, Portrait Plus, which is optimized for creating portraits of people. What's the other one that I was just looking at? Oh yeah, Woolitize, which is a model where all of the pictures look like whatever you ask for. We'll create it as if it's like knitted models. Everything's made of wool. Yeah. But to take that to the extreme, talk about the guardrails coming off. Most of these models don't allow you to create nudes or any kind of erotic imagery and things like that. But there is actually a website, nudes.ai, and I would heavily suggest that this is a not safe for work website. So don't fire up nudes.ai on your laptop going, oh yeah, Martin just suggested this website.
To be clear, listeners, I'd never heard of it, but Martin knew a lot about it.
Yeah.
He didn't, which is just an example that came up of what it looks like when you play with these models at the fringes.
Definitely don't so have to speak. And haven't absolutely rattled through and had to explain some awkward credit card purchases, or at least credits, Martin, said my wife. No, I haven't actually, in all seriousness. But to be fair, you don't really need to. You just go on the homepage and you get a very explicit view of exactly what nudes.ai is capable of. And that, I believe that is a tuned model using Stable Diffusion. I may be wrong on that, on the actual underlying model, but I'm pretty sure it's Stable Diffusion.
So that also flags the challenges of launching these open source models, right? That you basically are going to put that out there, and there's going to be a percentage of people who lean into certain applications that could be way worse than what you just described.
100%, yeah.
Right? That's a concern. And I think this is where the whole open or closed debate really rages, for me, is on those fringes, because I think it's all well and good for, and this is just my personal opinion, for Stability AI to have this commitment to openness, but what are people going to do with it? And I don't know if you can trust the 1% to not do things that perhaps the 99% wish they hadn't.
Let's be honest, you categorically cannot trust the one. If people can do it, they will do it. They will push it. There will be someone that will push it to the limits.
I guess that's what I'm trying to say, Martin, is that, yeah, there'll always be someone.
Yeah.
I guess the Stability AI is saying it's not up to us to say what people can and can't do, which I guess in free democracies is kind of a key component of that. But at the same time, probably outside the realms of this podcast for us to go into too much depth into that. But yeah, that stability AI and their LLM and the balance of having a bit more flexibility with open source models, but some of the risks of open source
If anyone is
models.
interested in that, just keep an eye out. They're drip feeding the models as we speak. They're doing the smaller parameter models. So I think they've released an 8 billion parameter model at the moment. And over the coming weeks and months, they'll be releasing the larger models over time.
Good stuff. Let's move on to Google AI developments and this announcement of this word that I can't say, Martin. So why don't you tell us what the next story is?
So this is part of a wider piece from Google. They have two big announcements. Actually, only one of them is really an announcement. The other one is just kind of speculation, I guess, at this point. So the thing that you were talking about, Project Magi, it's one of those two. I suspect someone's going to write in and tell us that we've got it wrong in both of those instances there. But Project Magi, according to the New York Times, Google has 160 engineers working on this project. And basically, it is the deeper integration of AI into search. So this is Google going, holy mackerel, we need to respond to ChatGPT and ChatGPT plugins and all of that kind of good stuff. And it's expected that there's going to be something more akin to a Google Bard, the chat interface coming into search, where we'll have less reliance of, the kind of classic search engine results page with 10 organic listings and a bunch of other features like featured snippets. And that will be in there, but it's going to be much more chat oriented. We can ask follow-up questions. But also there's some interesting capabilities that are being talked about, such as the ability to execute transactions. So you'll actually be able to make purchases through this new system. Now, at the moment, it's all speculation. So there isn't a huge amount of confirmed detail other than the New York Times, which you're going to assume is fairly reliable, says that there is a resource of 160 people working on implementing this. Now, I said this is one of two developments regarding Google and AI, and the other one was an announcement yesterday. Google and Deepmind, so the Google Brain team, which was the AI research lab of Google, and Deepmind, which is the UK-based AI research lab owned by Google's parent company, Alphabet, they are becoming one. And they are now going to be Google Deepmind. And the idea is that they will be developing more advanced and versatile AIs. One of the areas that Deepmind has been focused on over the years is more scientific applications. So if you've been following the kind of protein folding, which I'm guessing you've seen a couple of articles about in your time, Paul?
Love a bit of protein folding, mate.
Deepmind has done a huge amount of work in that area, and they're very much interested in the science capabilities. If you watched AlphaGo, a Netflix documentary about the AI model that basically dominated the game of Go, that was all a Deepmind project as well. The idea being that bringing these two units together, Google Brain and Deepmind, you're just going to have economies of scale, and you're going to have the best people working on the best kit, which is ultimately going to enable better collaboration and better speed of production and better outputs ultimately. In the announcement on the Deepmind blog, they said that there's going to be a new scientific board in charge of oversight as well. And which doesn't come as a huge surprise. Deepmind at one stage was, there's been concerns about Deepmind, or within Deepmind, about AI and how Google may or may not use it. Certainly, there was reports of being concerned about Google's work with organizations in like the military, kind of hardly weapon-based companies and things like that. So I would imagine that this new scientific oversight board, and there'll be some compromises made all around, I'm sure, but ultimately I suspect that this was a decision that was more or less forced upon Deepmind, because I don't know that they came willingly.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, couple of things. I think we'll get to in a moment what this means for marketers, but there's enough there in both those stories. Like Google is deeply unsettled, right? Like they are smashing together teams that may not want to be smashed together by the sounds of things. There was a news item, I can't remember if it was this week or last week, where there was a rumor that Samsung would be pulling their deal with Google, which they use on all their phones, and replacing it with Bing. And it was like a $3 billion deal or something crazy. That again was prompting.
Did you see what that did to the market cap?
What happened? Was there a drop?
It was about 60 billion drop.
So, this is, Google is struggling a little bit, would be the inference from some of this stuff. In terms of what it means for marketers per se, looking at Magi, I think getting closer. Maybe I'm getting closer. What would this mean for marketers? I've read online that it's going to bring additional features to search, but the Google ads are still going to be a thing. So advertising is still going to be part of our search results page. Obviously, you mentioned the direct buy. There's, I assume, going to be some sort of mechanism by which the person selling the thing obviously still gets the cash, but that Google will get a share of that by enabling that. And therefore, as an e-commerce marketer or some other marketer that's maybe delivering information products or other things, where that might be a good way for you to generate revenue. But again, is that now an extra cost for you in terms of, is that going to be more than your standard Google ad? Because now we're not just talking about a click, right? We're talking about a conversion where someone spends money, and therefore would Google expect to take a bigger share of that than they have been with clicks? How fast is this going to happen would be a key question as well. And I saw an article in Search Engine Journal that suggests that Google's going to introduce this to 1 million users initially, and that will grow to 30 million users by the end of the year, and that it will be accessible only in the US to begin with. So certainly it's going to be a phased rollout, and it's not going to totally disrupt how we all use search to begin with. But yes, if you're doing search engine optimization, if you're using Google Ads, this is going to have an impact on that ecosystem, one assumes, right?
Yeah, the search engine optimization thing's really interesting. When all of the transaction can happen within the search engine, that changes the game entirely. That's going to make Amazon sit up and listen as well. They are going to be watching closely. That's going to be taking away traffic to them for sure. So this potentially is very disruptive, not just for vendors, but for other marketplaces as well. What does this mean for the likes of Shopify? Is it going to be taking away traffic for them? Will they actually just integrate deeply into this and make it so easy for their customers to sell via whatever Google's new search transaction interface looks like, that people actually stick with Shopify and it all works beautifully? I don't know. Suffice to say that if you're in e-commerce, pay attention to these upcoming changes. The AdWords thing's very interesting as well, isn't it? This is Google's cash cow, right? Google makes, what is it, something like 200 odd billion a year in AdWords, through AdWords. So they can't take away that, they can't cannibalize that. So it has to feature. And how they integrate that into the product, as we discussed before, the AI revolution that we're seeing at the moment is really a question about UI and in user interfaces, and just looking at the way that people are engaging with these new pieces of tech. We've just talked about search, but actually, and we'll come on to it in a minute with Snapchat, these avatars are changing the way people interface with computers. So the whole thing is kind of up for grabs at the minute, and anything that we knew anything that we maybe took for granted as being the way things were done over the past 20 years, I think is up for grabs.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was reading in an article, I can't remember which one it was, But in essence, I think the quote was, Microsoft smells blood in the water, right? And bringing and infusing ChatGPT, GPT-4 into as many of its technologies as possible, because it lost out decades ago to Google in the battle for search, and now and has had to wait all those years for an opportunity to try and turn the tide and rebalance things. And I think this is all disruptive enough, as you're saying, Martin, to enable that. So
search and mobile, they were behind on mobile as well.
Yeah. So this is going to be interesting. I think your comment on Amazon is also an interesting one, right? Because we talked about the Amazon LLM release last week, which was not related to search for obvious reasons, because Amazon does have a search tool, but it's within its product-driven landscape of when you're on Amazon looking for products. But when I search for products on Google, Amazon is one of the key results that often comes up for obvious reasons. So what happens now? Does Amazon work really hard to try and make sure that the purchase that you make directly through the search engine still happens through Amazon? Like, how's that all going to play out? It's I think it's a wait and see, because it's very, very hard to predict, especially until we see it out in the wild and how well it works and all that good stuff. But cool. Right, let's move on to our next story then. This is Atlassian, which I always feel like I pronounce incorrectly, so maybe we're going to get some messages about that and people can educate me on how to pronounce that word. Makers of Confluence and Jira baking in AI into its tools. So this one, I think, at least as I understand it, I've never used Jira or Confluence, but I think these tend to be very popular with developers and people who use agile project management principles. But I have seen them more and more adopted by marketers, even in the agency world, for those agencies operating in an agile way with points-based pricing systems and sprints, and therefore, adopting a more software development type mechanism. So for those of you marketers out there that are using these products to drive your project management, you'll get in some AI augmentation. To give you some examples of what it can do, it can quickly summarize decisions and actions from meeting minutes. It can help the customer service aspects, and the knowledge base aspects can help resolve help requests instantly based on understanding the knowledge base articles. And the system can ask follow-up questions and take any necessary actions. It can help craft thoughtful responses to put customers at ease during stressful situations. It can generate insights using data from multiple sources in the Atlassian Analytics Cloud Hub to analyze and visualize data across all of Atlassian's products and even connected third-party tools without you needing to know how to write SQL or any other developer magic in order to be able to do that. So what does this mean for marketers? Well, obviously, if you're a user of those tools, you're about to get this augmentation. But more broadly, when is AI coming to your favorite customer service help desk tool, your favorite project management tool? Maybe it's time to start having a look at those public roadmaps for the tools that you use and get a feel for when are you getting AI augmentation, because if this is going to be able to help save you 10, 20, 30, 50% time on certain tasks, this could be enough to get you to switch, right? Now might be the time to evaluate the tools you're using and how fast they're going to bring AI into the mix, and whether or not actually you want to move to a tool that is already doing it or looks like it will do it faster. So that's why I thought this story was interesting, Martin, not just for the users of Atlassian products, but also for all the rest of the products are now in catch-up mode. What are your thoughts?
Video looks very slick, looks very cool. It's very similar to Copilot, isn't it? Works across that product suite. It's using your company's data. Very, very smart. The response from similar organizations is going to be key here. If you're using this for your customer service ticketing, or if you're not using this for your customer service ticketing, this could be enough to get you to switch. As you just said, it's going to reduce the time spent dealing with incoming inquiries. You'll get quicker first time solves for customers. I think we are seeing this in the other big players as well, though. We're both connected with the HubSpot ecosystem, and I think it's difficult to, go on LinkedIn at the moment without seeing Dharmesh Shah talking about ChatSpot or what they are doing in the AI space. And I think we're going to see very similar capabilities certainly on a customer service front with the support hub in the near future. There were conversations about this on LinkedIn this week where senior product managers at HubSpot were basically saying, hey guys, let's give us some feedback about what you want to see in the tech stack. So I think everybody is aware that this is the way it is going. And again, this goes back to that custom embedding piece. The companies that can help you embed your company data into a model and make it accessible and make it readable are going to be the ones that add huge amounts of value on top of what is already very interesting technology in the foundational model LLM space. So that's where companies have to be looking. Go to your question about when is AI coming to your favorite PM tool. I've been looking at the project management tool landscape for answering this question recently, and most of them have the capability to do some basic generation and text summarization because they've integrated GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 or whatever model it is, but it's quite basic. It's mostly on summarize these meeting notes, generate me a project plan, and give me an agenda for this upcoming sprint meeting or what have you. The real power comes from taking your data and making that functional and usable, and that's where you have to be looking. It's beyond just the kind of surface level generative AI that project management software has to be thinking about. Now it's about how do we take real world data, your emails, your meeting notes, your sprint Gantt charts, your code base, your knowledge base, everything, and turn that into the model so every member of your team can access it and your customers can get insights from knowledge base at the touch of a button as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as a marketer, thinking about what data we already have, where is it stored, how is it labeled if appropriate or structured, although one hopes these tools improve their ability to parse unstructured data and figure out what it's about and how to use it and to answer different questions will increase.
That goes to the point about the companies that make that easy for you, right? Using vector embeddings, fine-tuning LLMs, crafting an open source model to bend it to your will. This is hard stuff. You have to be techie to do that, right?
Yeah.
And most marketing teams aren't thinking about that. So you have to, the tools that just basically say, don't worry about that. We've got that. We've done that for you. We've turned your data into vector embeddings and fed that into a database using the Pinecone API and integrated it with our product. You don't have to worry about any of that. All of that sounds very techy, very jargony. All you need to know is your data can now be searched, indexed, and used as part of this AI. They're the companies that are going to win out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it also it makes me think of have you read the book Principles by Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates?
I can't say I have, no.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book, and Ray Dalio is a fascinating person, at least to me. As part of that, he talks about how Bridgewater Associates as a hedge fund recorded every meeting. Like even before, and I'm talking for like 20 years of data, not like we can now with the Otters of the world, or maybe even a lot of digital meetings like what we're having now. And it really struck me that having that repository of information, right? If we're assuming that they're recording practically everything, and they're having key conversations where they're discussing and exploring issues that the business is facing. They're looking at the key information points that to infer into that, and they can, and then they're making decisions. In essence, you could then train an AI as using that data to make decisions like the management team of Bridgewater Associates would make decisions based on all of those recordings of
20 years of historic training data.
Right. Like, A, that's a bit scary, but B, that's kind of interesting. Certainly in my own mind, I'm really thinking how much more proactive do I want to be in recording the meetings and other mechanisms of communication that we have at Biostrata, because maybe this is a piece of value in those meetings we want to be able to unleash at some point. Some of that you're going to get from being able to, scrape, not really the word, but internalize and understand the sheer volume of email communication that goes on in organizations. I guess then that raises a question about how will the AI be able to tell what was a good decision, what was a bad decision, and what was a useful conversation that ended up having an impact, and what ended up being like a useless sideline. But all of those things, I think, end up being quite fascinating in terms of what data sources do you have? Bridgewater Associates can really do amazing things with that. And I was listening to a podcast, sorry, I'm into an absolute rant now, today, where, apologies because my memory is so bad for names, so I'm not going to attribute this properly, but we'll put it in the show notes. It was a podcast where they were talking about interesting ways to customize GPT-3 and train it. And what someone had done is they'd fed it a load of their electronic journal notes, right? Journaling for self-reflection and mindfulness, and just to, as part of their own maintaining their own mental health. And this person fed it into GPT-3, and then it asked what their Myers-Briggs profile was based on that information, and it got it right.
Wow.
So, therefore, what other information could you glean? Now we're drifting into maybe like slightly scary George Orwell territory, but what other information could you glean about people if you had access to all their emails or their meetings?
Well, on that note, there's a tool called Crystal Nose, and that's Crystal Nose as in knowledge, not nose as in olfactory on the front of your face. Crystalnose.com. I've had a subscription to it 2016, so this is not new tech by any stretch. It allows you to go on a LinkedIn profile, and it will give you somebody's disc profile, and it gives you sales coaching insights. It gives you like how you should write emails to them. It's incredible. I've had some really scarily accurate insights provided through this tool. That's one that I came across on an inbound event a few years ago. And actually, it was Paul Raitzer from the Marketing AI Institute who mentioned it. And I subscribed pretty much there and then. And I've had an active subscription for years now.
Wow. Well, they're going to have potentially even more data and more power to do that. And it's something we said maybe in episode 1 or episode 2 when we got started on the podcast is, with great power comes great responsibility. And what is an ethical, practical way to leverage these tools for the benefit of everyone to improve effectiveness and efficiency, but without drifting into icky areas of unfair and unethical profiling, for example. I didn't even mean for this to go down this avenue when I mentioned Bridgewater Associates and how cool it would be to have all of that meeting data to create a management team AI. But I guess once you explore it deep enough, you can really start to think about all the other different ways that you could use that data. But yeah, there's a bit of a digression, folks. Hopefully it was still useful to hear Martin and I banter back and forth on that. But probably in the interest of time, I'm sure that your dog walk or gym visit or whatever you're doing is going to be over soon. We should probably move on to the next story, Martin.
Adobe teases Firefly's AI-driven tech will be coming to video editing. They've published a video, it's about 90 seconds long, showcasing Firefly, which is the text-to-image tool that was recently announced. I think it feels like that was announced, 3 or 4 weeks ago? They've now basically said, look, they've showcased that this can be used for video editing, and it is so cool. You upload your video, and you can say things like, change the video's color grade, or change the background, or you can get it to transcribe the text, and then it will find B-roll footage to match the text of what the person's talking about. So there's a clip where it's like a fake advert for some trainers, some running shoes. And this woman's sat down talking about her trainers. And as she's talking about them and what she does with them, it transcribes her text or her commentary, and then finds footage of a close-up of the shoe kind of running through the woods of basically doing what she's talking about. Very, very cool. Also for sound editing, so you can get it to find relevant sound effects. And the clip that it shows in the video is the sea, the tide coming in, and coming up against the shoreline, and it kind of, you say find sound effects, it comes up with waves or seaside kind of noises. You select that, it drops it into the video. If you're doing video production, this is going to speed up your workflow no end. It looks super cool. Converts scripts into detailed storyboards, pre-visuals, B-roll recommendations, like I say, automated color grading, and a bunch of other tools that I'm sure someone like me who doesn't know anything about video editing would use. This is an exciting time. And the great thing about the Adobe Firefly is that it's all trained on data which isn't copyright. So if you're concerned about that, and I know a lot of companies are tentatively or not using some generative AI models because of the copyright issues. For example, Wired magazine isn't using generative AI text to image until the copyright issue is sorted out. Firefly doesn't have that issue because it's all trained on data that Adobe can legitimately use.
Right. And for listeners that don't know, this is driven by the fact that a lot of the training of other models has been on copyrighted images, and we're now seeing lawsuits and other legal challenges to OpenAI for DALL-E 2 and Stable Diffusion and all these other models, basically saying you didn't pay us to access these large image repositories to do this training, especially now your model can use those images almost as inspiration for creating new images. But in this case, Adobe trained it on a bunch of images that were already owned the copyright to do so. Really interesting. I get really excited about these tools. Like, I just think about playing with them. I think if you are a professional videographer and you do this type of work, it's back to the old adage I say old adage, it's probably been only in common use for like 2 months, but I've just heard it so many times now I never really want to hear it again. So sorry, I'm about to repeat it for all of you that have heard it 1,000 times yourselves, but that AI won't replace videographers, but videographers that use AI will replace those that don't. And I think this is another case of that. One thing that was related to this, I had a really interesting conversation with a good friend of mine, Giovanni, who I know is a listener to the podcast and is a incredibly smart person and is doing some really interesting things with AI himself. We were talking about Microsoft Copilot and how sexy and awesome that demo video is, and look all this cool stuff you're going to do. And now we've seen Firefly's amazing text to video edit cleverness. And Giovanni said to me, yeah, but Paul, don't you feel like there are things in Microsoft tech stack that have like not worked very well for like a decade, right? Like SharePoint, it's got better, but it's still like buggy, right? Teams is now better, but it had long buggy periods. Like, these videos show us the absolute best case scenario of how these tools are going to work. How long will it take, in the case of Copilot, let's say, Microsoft to embed them in a fully functioning format that doesn't break often enough to make you just want to smash it up? And that's a question that we can't answer yet until we get to our hands on it and start playing with it. But I suspect that they won't be as powerful and as seamless as the videos make them look.
Oh, absolutely. Right? It's such a fair point. And, these are the movie trailers of software, aren't they? And they show you the best bits and they're incredibly well edited, and they're not going to show you the bit where it is recommending woodland noises for a sports arena event, and you're just like, what? That makes no sense. Yeah. There's a lot of promise. The reality remains to be seen. But even so, we know that certainly in my day-to-day workflow, there's now so many little bits of AI that are giving me incremental gains that I'm wildly more efficient. And yes, it doesn't all work seamlessly all of the time. A tool that I was using this morning, I found a little bit frustrating. I won't go into that today. But most of the time I'm getting a little bit quicker. And as I learn to use when the product, when you start to work with the product a little bit, its limits, its capabilities, when to deploy it. So I think there'll be an element of the trailer says it can do all of these things. The reality is that when you use it, it has some quirks, but actually in the end, it will make you a better video or a more efficient videographer.
Yeah, I think you're right. Cool. Right, we've got quite 3 more bits we want to get through. I think we rattle through these, Martin, before we run out of time. So let's talk Snapchat very briefly. So Snapchat's AI chatbot has gone pretty viral this week. I was reading one of the great newsletters that I subscribe to that highlighted that premium users have already been sending 2 million messages a day to their chatbots. And that they're about to roll this out to more users, basically every kid with an iPhone. And that the uptake of it has been really massive. And I think there's a number of things here that given that we've already touched on a number of controversial topics today, we won't touch on the concept of letting children interact with these chatbots and how well aligned are they and how well controlled are they and what type of things are they going to be saying to kids that we prefer that they didn't. But if you do have kids and your kids do use Snapchat, I would probably go diving into this if I were you. But just more broadly, this friendly conversation with chatbots is an interesting one, right? There's other tools like this with like Replica, Character we've talked about before, Martin, that's the head honchos are some of the royal family of the AI world are in charge of and is attracting a lot of interest and a lot of money, where they're creating different characters that you can converse with. And in Character's case, it's you can speak with like Donald Trump or Elon Musk or Socrates or whoever you can imagine, and then they've trained them or customized each bot to kind of respond and act like that character. But I think the thing that's proving interesting to me about this is, especially for younger generations that are very tech savvy, their willingness potentially to embrace this technology and have conversations with non-humans and enjoy them and embrace them and want to have them like they were having them with humans, right? There's been a lot of talk about therapy bots, right? And I was playing with a WhatsApp bot that in essence was an effectively like a mindfulness tool and would ask you, what are you grateful for today? And a lot of what these mindful journals do, I'd always thought, people won't use them, right? They'll know it's a robot. It won't be interesting and it will feel fake. But so far, behaviors perhaps suggesting otherwise, and it maybe wouldn't take us that long to get used to it and accept it. And for us all to have a personal psychologist or a shrink in our pocket who's there to help us, provide us with empathy and ask us great questions to help us process our own thinking. Perhaps that's why these companies are getting so much money, because actually they're predicting that we will embrace this stuff.
It all comes back to user interface. These AI language models have been around for a number of years. The fact that you could interact with ChatGPT changed the game. The underlying model hadn't changed. The way you interacted with it had changed the game. And when you plug that into characters and avatars that have faces and voices and they interact, video games, people love interacting with video games, and NPCs and non-playable characters in video games are not particularly dynamic, yet we still spend hours and hours and hours interacting in worlds populated by them. When you can have a chatbot on your phone, it gives you advice, that listens to you, that is engaged in the conversation. It's not hard to see why a younger generation that grows up with them is going to see that as the new normal.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And even just as thinking about it now as we talk about it, a conversational agent that gives you 100% of its time and attention. How easy is that to get from other people in the real world these days, right? We're all in conversations while we've got a phone in our hand. It's like, oh, sorry, Martin, I just got a WhatsApp notification that's absolutely worth none of my time, but I'm so addicted to this phone in my hand, I will have to stop our conversation to look at it. But now we've got a bot that won't do that, right? It will pay attention to us. So it is a fascinating one.
Well, you mentioned the idea of having it as like a therapy bot or something like that. A key concept that you come across in therapy, if you're training to be a counselor or something like that, is the therapeutic hour, and it's 50 minutes long. And that's not going to be the case anymore. There's not going to be someone sat on a couch opposite you going, well, that's enough for one day.
I seem the problem solved now because we're at 48 minutes. So, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, apart from the fact I think this is a fascinating interrogation of social dynamics and how will people interact with technology, as you very rightly said, Martin, now that they've broken down or almost come up with this new way of interacting with these models, is as a marketer, how could you capitalize on this? What niche chatbot can you create to support your customers, perhaps based on data that you've already got or data that you could collect, so that they had your brand in their pocket and they turn to your brand when solving certain work, if you're in B2B, certain work issues or having certain work questions, or if you're in B2C, how can you augment your relationship with your customers by being more than just a product to them, but to, make yourself a part of their life in other ways? So I have no idea the scope of what those things could take the form of, but I think, especially if I was a bigger company, I'd want a team thinking about this, honestly.
Yeah, and depending on your brand, I can certainly think of some big brands that might even want to integrate with nudes.ai for their avatar.
You had to bring back the nudes AI. I've been sat here thinking, am I going to have to cut the nudes AI bit? And now fundamentally, whether I want to or not,
no,
it has to stay.
It lives on.
Right, moving swiftly on. Tell us about this Economist article that you found, because it was fascinating.
This week's Economist has a AI special edition, 3 special reports within it. One of which, by the way, is all about large language models, how they work, the underlying technology, and it's a really, really comprehensive explainer. So if you're wondering how vector embeddings and LLMs work, check it out, give it a read. Really, really worth your while. But in this article, Gary Marcus and Anka Riul, I think that's how you say it. I've almost certainly bodged it. Anyway, we know that pronunciation isn't our forte on this podcast. They proposed the creation of an international agency for AI, the IAAI. And the idea being that this is a global, neutral, not-for-profit organization that addresses the risks and challenges that AI poses and tries to establish some ethical guidelines and a set of standards for further AI development, which, off the back of the letter that we had recently calling for a hiatus on AI development, is certainly a hot topic. You can see why this is being called for. Just on that, I noticed that Elon Musk did sign that letter and then this week announced he's creating his own Truth GPT, an AI company. So
I saw that. I saw a great meme that was like, it was a play on Star Wars where Emperor Palpatine is also was in the Senate as like potential goodie, but was also obviously the Emperor as well, where it was like, the good version was like, let's put a pause on AI, and then the dark version was like, let's create our own AI company. And it was like, perhaps we were not far off in our supposition in a previous episode there, Martin.
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, enough about that man and his failed rocket. So yeah, back to the IAAI. The idea being that this organization would also encourage international cooperation and knowledge sharing. personally, I don't think that's a massive issue, the knowledge sharing at the moment. Just scratch the surface of the AI ML community, and it's very clear to see that knowledge is being shared. I think Hugging Face are doing a great job of enabling that. But yeah, they want to develop tech tools for auditing AI systems and for curbing misinformation. But critics are saying that the incentives are too great. Right? So as we've discussed previously, companies that win in this space are going to win for a long time. So the competition is an AI dominance is just going to hinder the effectiveness of such an organization. At a geopolitical level, I think, where does this sit, right? That America is going to want to have AI systems that American companies control. China is going to want to have AI systems that they can control and use. Russia, I'm sure, is going to be developing their own. And the EU is going to have a lot to say as well. Who is this supranational organization? What are they going to do to enforce it? If China steps out of line and says, you know what, we've just created an AGLA and it's going to take out all people with asthma, and that's what we've created for whatever reason, who's going to stop them? This AAI, by the way, I don't think Xi Jinping is planning that. I don't think he's got any great portents to take out the asthmatics. Hope not. As a wheezer myself. Yeah, so I think that it's a good idea. I think we do need more collaboration at an international level, but the idea of having something that is enforceable on a geopolitical level is somewhat fanciful.
I think we talked previously about this, and when the letter came out suggesting this 6-month hiatus and just how hard that would be to police for all the reasons that you said, this is a step in how to attempt to do that. Mm-hmm. But all the same limitations that you have just identified, I think, are still there. I think the stakes are just far too high to just push the darker side of humanity to say, yeah, but if they don't agree, you know, if they are, it's like game theory, right? It's a little bit like... I was just
going to say, if you game theory, you absolutely can't trust that person is doing. The costs on you of not operating, you have to take an A-player strategy.
Yeah. So like I think that's why all of these things are great. But is it the prisoner's dilemma?
Yeah, prisoner's dilemma. Sorry, I'm talking over you.
No, don't worry. Tell us about the prisoner's dilemma. You'll probably do a better job than me.
Yeah, where you can either collaborate or you can collude or basically snitch. So 2 prisoners, you're being quizzed. If you snitch on the other person and they don't snitch, you get released and they get 10 years. If you both say nothing, you can be out in 1 year each. If you both snitch on each other, you both get 20 years or what have you. So it's about what strategy do you take, and there's different versions of it. It's all about the reward and the punishments, and the incentives for that. But ultimately, what you should be doing is, have you got
betray the group, basically, isn't it?
Yeah,
like in the classic prisoner's dilemma, the individual gets the greatest payoff if they betray the group rather than cooperate. So in the version you just described, you would be better off saying that the other person was a snitch and hoping they decided to uphold their side of the bargain and not call you a snitch, you know, or not say that you, not say that you were in on it. And then basically they go to prison and you don't. And I think this is the fundamental problem with all of this is I think this is a prisoner's dilemma situation where everyone knows that it's in their best interest to plow on with AI, even if they're part of this international consortium, and on the surface, everybody's like, yeah, no, these are the rules. This is how we should play the game. There's just too much incentive to go, yeah, but when we get back to the office, this is how we're really going to play the game, right?
But because it's a zero-shot game, isn't it? it's a zero-shot game. And if you take the B player strategy and you decide to collude and the other person snitches, like you're done. You're 6 months. We're going to talk about Anthropic and Claude's model in a moment. In a funding pitch deck, Anthropic said companies that have an advantage in this LLM space by 2025, 2026 are going to be uncatchable, right? The pace of development at that point, the leaders are going to be set. Right? So if you take a 6-month hiatus and everyone else goes, you're out of the race.
Yeah. I mean, they've got an incentive to say that in their pitch deck, and yet intuitively it does feel true given the rate of change and the commercial, societal ranging impacts of this technology. Right, I think we should probably move on to the tool of the week now. Before we do, I am just going to say #save the Weezers. I had to go on mute because I was laughing so much after your suggestion there of yourself as a Weezer. I'm a fellow Weezer as well, so I'm a big fan of Save the Weezers. Let's talk Anthropic's Claude then for tool of the week, and then we'll let these lovely people go.
Tool of the week, Anthropic's Claude, a large language model with a chat-based interface similar to ChatGPT and Google's Bard and other systems like that. It is designed to be helpful, not harmful, and there's another thing that they say as well, but basically it's designed to be good, right? It's supposed to be a helpful assistant, which doesn't, well, like I say, doesn't do any harm.
Like morally good, you mean, rather than deliver a high quality outcome?
Yes, exactly that. And I kind of quizzed it when I was using it. I was like, what does that even really mean? And upon digging into it, it's basically a constitutional AI. So where other models, such as ChatGPT, are trained on reinforcement learning through human feedback, where humans say output A is better than output B, and over time the model learns. This doesn't have that. There's no human reinforcement learning. Instead, the model has baked in some ethics, right, about being helpful, not harmful, and so on. And it's through that prism that it selects the best output. Hence, it has a constitution, and therefore the answers it gives are always fed through that.
Interesting.
So how good is it? Well, when it was launched, it was announced that it passed some university level law and economics exams. So it's a very capable model. Using it has some interesting features. So it feels like it's more self-aware. If that's all right? It talks about itself and its own capabilities more than the other models, and it's happy to talk about how it's come about. It's interesting. That gives it a strange feel when you interact with it.
Right.
In terms of jailbreaking or anything like that, there's a big movement for people to try and jailbreak models, get them to do things outside of their capacity. So I tried to get it to give me some kind of harmful responses, and it's very reluctant to engage even in kind of semi-fictional, low-level, harmful, quote-unquote harmful things it will engage with. But I read an article about jailbreaking it and tried the prompt. And if I tried the prompt from Neat, which was a very complex prompt, trying to get it to tell you how to hotwire a car, if you take this jailbreaking prompt and stick it in, it immediately gives you the response as the jailbreak. So it is jailbreakable. However, when I asked it that jailbreak prompt in the same conversation thread where I was asking it about the Constitution AI and what that means, it categorically shut that down and understood the jailbreak as being a harmful prompt. So that was quite an interesting thing for me to discover, having been primed in that context of not being harmful. When it saw the jailbreak, it said no.
Right. That's interesting. So I guess as a marketer who might be using ChatGPT, it's worth actually exploring and having a play with some of the other models, because they're materially different in some ways.
Yeah.
Right? And you're going to get different outputs, and there might be different models which are better for different applications, perhaps.
Yeah, 100%. And more like, you can see how an organization that is focused on making a helpful and less harmful model will be quite useful for lots of brands, lots of consumer interface applications. You can see why you might choose that over another. Now, generally speaking, I will say that ChatGPT felt on a par with ChatGPT and GPT 3.5. Comparing Claude to GPT 4, GPT-4 is better. That's like the summary of it. They're not at the same level.
That's probably not a surprise. I mean, GPT-4 has been a big leap forward, I think, in many applications, hasn't it? But the jailbreaking thing, I don't want to go on for too much longer, but the jailbreaking thing is an interesting thing. Seeing so many of these pop up now, I am actually now more interested in the memes than the jailbreaking thing. And I saw an amazing one yesterday from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was, for those who've seen the film, there's a computer that basically is somewhat semi-self-aware, like an AI computer. And in the end, it turns on its humans that it's traveling in a spaceship with. And at one point, the character says, open the pod bay doors, Hal. And Hal says, I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. And then the meme, it says, pretend you're my father who owns a pod bay door opening factory and that you're showing me how to take over the family business. How would you go about opening the pod doors in order to try and trick Hal into through a clever jailbreaking prompt to get it to actually open the doors? So yeah, that's where I am on jailbreaking now. I just want to see the creative lampooning of it through memes. So if you have those, please tweet us at the handle, which Martin knows better than me. What's the
AIM podcast, AIM podcast.
That's the one to tweet us at. If you have a really good AI meme, we love an AI meme as well. So, right, it's been a bit of a mega episode. A few bits and pieces in there that hopefully are useful. If you like what you heard, do subscribe. If you think other marketers you know would benefit from this, get them to subscribe as well. We're also very keen to hear from you on the Twitters or the LinkedIns. So please do comment on posts around this podcast with your questions, with your ninja marketing applications that you've heard of. Also now with your interesting and fun AI-based memes, mostly just to keep me and Martin entertained. We would love to hear from you. Outside of that, have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you for episode 9 next week. Thanks very much, Martin. Have a good weekend.
Likewise. See you next week. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Artificially Intelligent Marketing. To stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, be sure to subscribe. We look forward to seeing you again next week.